I just canceled the $8,500 deposit on my brother's luxury engagement venue. Exactly 30 seconds later, I stood up with a glass of red wine and told a room full of Chicago's elite exactly what I had done. He thought my dirty, dangerous job just made me a useful idiot, a silent bank account to fund his fake millionaire lifestyle. Tonight, he learns what happens when the bank account bites back. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep the lights on and pay our dedicated team. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our staff can afford their living expenses and continue bringing these stories to life. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. My name is Cassidy Keller. I am 32 years old, and I clean up the nightmares that most polite society pretends do not exist. I am the founder and lead operator of Aegis Remediation Services, located right here in Chicago. My company specializes in biological hazard cleanup and severe toxic chemical remediation. It is grueling, physically punishing labor. My typical Tuesday involves sealing myself into a Level A protective hazmat suit in the middle of a sweltering July heat wave, hauling industrial-grade scrubbers into contaminated warehouses, and washing away the remnants of chemical spills. Hoarding disasters, or worse, the air I breathe at work tastes like heavy bleach and sterilized decay. It is a dirty, highly dangerous, and utterly unglamorous profession, but it is also incredibly lucrative. Over the past 6 years, I built Aegis from a two-person van operation into a dominant firm with heavy municipal contracts. I earned every single dollar in my corporate accounts with calloused hands, sweat, and an iron stomach. Then, there is my older brother, Julian. If my life is grounded in concrete and bleach, Julian's life is built entirely on expensive vapor. Julian styles himself as a lifestyle consultant and startup venture investor. If you were to casually scroll through his social media feeds, you would genuinely believe he was a self-made tech tycoon. His digital life is a meticulously curated masterpiece of custom-tailored Italian suits, weekends on rented luxury yachts skimming across Lake Michigan, and perfectly angled photographs of rare vintage wines at exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants. But behind the high-definition filters and the rehearsed confident smiles, Julian does not possess a single ounce of steady, reliable income. He never has. He is, in the most literal sense, a parasite wearing a luxury watch. And for my entire adult life, I was the host he fed upon. I was the silent ghost who paid the exorbitant rent for his high-rise apartment in River North when his investments inevitably fell through. I was the emergency fund that covered the missed payments on his leased sports car so it would not be repossessed in front of his wealthy friends. Every single time Julian dug himself into a catastrophic financial trench, my mother would call me. Her voice would drip with that familiar, practiced tone of maternal desperation and subtle manipulation. "Cassidy, please, you just have to help your brother out this one last time." She would plead over the phone. Julian needs to maintain his image for his business network. In his corporate world, perception is reality. You do not understand how these things work because of your specific line of work. She always said it like that, as if my honest labor was something to be embarrassed by. So, exhausted and worn down, I paid. I allowed my mother to guilt-trip me, and I allowed my brother to siphon my hard-earned hazardous duty pay to fund his endless delusions of grandeur. This toxic family dynamic finally accelerated toward its breaking point when Julian proudly announced his engagement to Sloane. Sloane was not just a typical wealthy girl. She was the prized daughter of a legacy real estate dynasty in Chicago. We are talking about generational, old money wealth, the kind of family whose last name is carved into the marble facades of historic downtown bank buildings, naturally, to secure his place at their dining table. Julian had to put on the absolute performance of a lifetime to convince Sloane's intimidating family that he was their financial equal. A few weeks before the lavish engagement party, Julian showed up at my front door, putting on a brilliantly acted display of sheer, unadulterated panic. He paced around my living room, running his trembling hands through his perfectly styled hair, claiming that a jealous former business partner was threatening to leak false, damaging information about him. He spun a wild tale about his assets being temporarily frozen in a malicious, bogus lawsuit. "Cassidy, I am completely locked out of my bank accounts," he begged, looking genuinely frantic with wide, desperate eyes. "If Sloane's family catches even a whisper of this legal mess, they will force her to call off the wedding immediately. They care about their public reputation more than absolutely anything else. I just need you to cover the deposit for the engagement party venue. It is $8,500. I swear I will wire you the money back the exact second my accounts are cleared." I was dead on my feet. I had just finished a grueling 14-hour shift clearing a condemned industrial chemical site. My bones ached, my muscles screamed in protest, and I simply did not have the mental energy to fight his manufactured crisis. I just wanted him out of my house so I could shower the lingering smell of industrial solvents off my skin. Reluctantly, I agreed. However, I absolutely refused to hand him the cash directly. Instead, I wired the $8,500 straight to the venue's corporate account. The location was the Glass Conservatory, a breathtaking, glass-domed botanical garden situated on a high-rise rooftop, exclusively reserved for the city's ultra-elite. As I sat at my kitchen island and hit the confirm button on the bank transfer, watching the massive sum leave my account, I made a silent, unbreakable vow in my heart. This was it. This was the absolute last time I would ever allow my family to use me as their personal automatic teller machine. I just did not know yet exactly how deeply I was being played. A few weeks before the grand engagement party, the fragile facade of my brother's lies began to crack. It started on a damp Tuesday afternoon when I drove out to my mother's house in the suburbs. I needed to retrieve some original tax documents from year 2018 for an upcoming municipal contract audit. I kept an old, heavy steel filing cabinet in my childhood bedroom for legacy paperwork. When I knelt on the carpet and reached for the handle, my hand froze. The metal around the lock was brutally gouged, stripped clean of its paint. Someone had taken a flathead screwdriver and violently pried the drawer open. My heart did a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. I pulled the drawer out. The meticulously organized folders containing the early financial records of Aegis Remediation Services were violently shoved out of order. Before I could process the violation, my mother appeared in the doorway. She did not ask what I was doing. Instead, she carried a nervous, erratic energy, pacing the floorboards while refusing to meet my eyes. She began issuing a bizarre list of demands for the upcoming party. "Cassidy, I need you to wear something very plain this weekend," she instructed, her voice tight with forced casualness. "Maybe that dull gray dress you wore to church last year. And please, keep a low profile. Do not mingle too much. And whatever you do, absolutely do not mention your cleaning job in front of Sloane's family. They are high society. They do not want to hear about biohazards or toxic waste over expensive champagne. Just smile, eat your dinner, and stay out of the way." I stared at her, absorbing the sheer audacity of her words. She was commanding the person who had just funded the venue deposit to play the role of an embarrassing, mute servant. I did not argue. I simply nodded, sliding the damaged filing drawer shut. My mind was already shifting gears, transforming from a tired daughter into the ruthless, analytical operator who built a highly profitable company from the ground up. The true scale of the deception revealed itself the very next morning. I was sitting at my office desk when a high-priority email landed in my inbox. It was from the events manager at the Glass Conservatory. The subject line read, "Urgent approval required. $40,000 floral and ambient lighting package." I opened the attached invoice. Right there, under the billing details, my name was explicitly listed, but I was not listed as the sister of the groom. The document identified me as Cassidy Keller, corporate accountant for Julian's supposed venture capital firm. He had given them my direct contact information to approve the invoices. banking on the fact that I would quietly pay it to avoid a public family humiliation. Most people would have picked up the phone right then, screaming and demanding answers. I did not. In my line of work, you do not panic when you walk into a toxic environment. You assess, you contain, and you dismantle the hazard. I locked my heavy oak office door, closed the blinds, and went to war. For the next 6 hours, I became a digital ghost hunting my own shadow. I contacted my private wealth manager and initiated a hard freeze on all my personal and corporate accounts. I ran comprehensive background checks and credit inquiries to ensure Julian had not fraudulently opened loans or credit lines in my name. The credit was clean, but my investigation led me back to the physical documents at my mother's house. I logged into my secure cloud servers and cross-referenced the file access histories. The truth hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Over the past 8 months, Julian had been systematically copying the certified financial reports of Aegis Remediation Services. He had stolen my quarterly profit and loss statements, my municipal contract payouts, and my corporate tax returns. He had taken the grueling, nauseating labor of my life, redacted my name, and stamped his own fictional startup logo across the headers. He was not just pretending to be wealthy on the internet anymore. He was actively using my multi-million-dollar company as his own financial portfolio to prove his worth to Sloane's billionaire father. A cold, absolute silence settled over my office. The lingering exhaustion I usually felt was completely gone, replaced by a razor-sharp, freezing clarity. I picked up my phone and dialed my corporate defense attorney. We spent the entire afternoon compiling an ironclad, undeniable dossier of legal ownership. Every original document, every digital timestamp, every single forged page Julian had created was printed and secured in a sleek leather binder. When the night of the engagement party finally arrived, I completely ignored my mother's frantic orders to remain invisible. I did not wear the dull gray dress. I slipped into a tailored, midnight black designer gown that draped like heavy liquid silk. I paired it with razor-sharp stiletto heels and a single, understated diamond necklace. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, letting my eyes turn perfectly dead and devoid of any sisterly affection. I was no longer the reliable bank account. I was a highly unstable explosive device walking right into the center of their glittering world, and the countdown timer had already reached 0. Stepping out of the elevator and into the glass conservatory was like crossing the threshold into an alternate universe. The air was thick with the heavy scent of imported orchids and the low, confident hum of generational wealth. Waiters in pristine white coats circulated effortlessly with silver trays of vintage champagne. I scanned the expansive room. The guest list was a perfectly curated selection of Chicago's corporate elite. Over in the corner, my mother and my extended family were huddled together, playing their assigned roles to perfection. They were the humble, quiet relatives, nodding eagerly at whatever the billionaires said, terrified of breaking the illusion of their own importance. I felt entirely alienated from them. Standing alone near a towering floral arrangement with the heavy leather binder resting against my hip like a concealed weapon, before I could even locate Julian in the sea of tailored custom suits, a commanding presence materialized beside me. It was Sloane's father, a silver-haired titan of the commercial real estate industry. He possessed the kind of imposing aura that only comes from decades of unquestioned authority and massive financial leverage. He did not bother to introduce himself. He simply assumed I knew exactly who he was. He placed a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder, looking at me with a sickening mixture of pity and forced warmth. "Cassidy, is it not?" he asked, his voice booming easily over the soft jazz music echoing through the glass dome. "I am so glad you could make it tonight. Julian warned us you might not handle the large crowd well. But here you are. I just want to say, I deeply admire your resilience. It takes real courage to try and rebuild your life after hitting rock bottom. You are incredibly lucky to have a brother willing to carry you through it." For a fraction of a second, the marble floor seemed to drop out from beneath my feet. The sheer absurdity of his words collided violently with reality. I did not flinch. I did not frown. The survival instincts I had honed in extremely hazardous environments kicked in immediately. When you are dealing with a volatile chemical reaction, you do not agitate it. You observe, you contain, and you measure. I fixed a bright, perfectly polite smile on my face and tilted my head, adopting an expression of mild, innocent curiosity. "That is incredibly kind of you to say," I replied, my voice smooth and dangerously even. "Julian is certainly one of a kind. He has been so deeply involved in my daily routine lately. Tell me, what exactly has he been sharing about our working relationship?" Sloane's father chuckled warmly, taking a slow sip of his expensive bourbon. He had absolutely no idea he was being interrogated by a professional. To him, I was just a fragile, broken woman grateful for the attention. "Oh, he is very modest about it, but he showed me the structural growth projections of Aegis remediation," he said, gesturing expansively with his free hand. "Building a specialized biohazard firm from scratch, securing those massive municipal contracts, it takes serious visionary leadership. He told us how he stepped in to create the company, and how he gave you a position on the cleaning crew to help you find some stability after your severe mental health struggles, keeping you on the payroll, giving you a sense of purpose. It shows true moral character. Not many executives would hire their own unstable sibling just out of charity." The coldness that washed over me was absolute. It was a freezing, paralyzing realization that settled deep into my marrow. Julian had not just stolen my financial documents to inflate his digital net worth. He had completely erased my existence. He had stolen my 6 years of blood, sweat, and toxic exposure, claiming my entire empire as his own brilliant invention. And to explain why my name was all over the operational paperwork and tax returns, he had reduced me to a mentally ill charity case, a pathetic janitor he graciously allowed to hold a mop. But the real estate tycoon was not finished talking. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice conspiratorially as if we were old friends. "That kind of fierce loyalty is exactly why I feel completely confident doing business with him. Anyone who protects his family like that will protect my daughter and my money. We are finalizing the venture capital injection tonight, $2 million going straight into his new startup fund to expand Aegis nationwide. We are signing the legal contracts right after the main toast." The final puzzle piece snapped into place with a sickening, heavy thud. The logic was mathematically perfect and entirely devoid of any human empathy. The fake blackmail story, the dramatic panic attack in my living room. Julian never needed $8,500 to save the family reputation from a vengeful business partner. He needed $8,500 to buy the stage lighting, the catering, and the prestige of the glass conservatory. He needed the perfect, wealthy backdrop to finalize a $2 million fraud against Sloane's family. I was not just a convenient bank account to him anymore. I was the bait, the scapegoat, and the ultimate collateral damage. If his fake startup fund went under, or if the tycoon ever audited the real Aegis operations, Julian would simply point the finger at his unstable sister, claiming I had mismanaged the ground operations in a manic episode. He was planning to take the $2 million and leave me holding the bag for federal corporate fraud. I looked at Sloane's father, my smile never wavering for a single second, though my eyes were completely dead. $2 million, I repeated softly, the words tasting like ash and iron in my mouth. "That is quite a monumental investment for a man like Julian. You must be very excited for the toast." "Absolutely," he beamed, patting my shoulder one last time before turning away to greet another wealthy guest. "It is going to be a night to remember." I stood alone near the edge of the curved glass wall, looking out over the glittering, endless Chicago skyline. The pain of betrayal had entirely evaporated. There was no anger left, no sorrow, no lingering attachment to the boy I grew up with. There was only a deadly, surgical precision. The storm had not just arrived. I was the storm, and I was going to tear his entire carefully constructed world down to the concrete foundation. The atmosphere inside the dome was suffocating. The air conditioning hummed silently beneath the floorboards, pumping artificially chilled air into the room. Yet I felt as though I were standing inside an industrial blast furnace. The space was a sensory overload of constructed perfection. Thousands of tiny, meticulously faceted crystal bulbs draped from the soaring glass ceiling, catching the city lights from the skyline outside and refracting them into blinding, diamond-sharp splinters across the polished marble floor. A live jazz quartet tucked into the corner played a sluggish, crawling saxophone melody that seemed to coat the inside of my throat like heavy syrup. Waiters in immaculate white gloves glided past me, carrying silver trays stacked high with endless rivers of vintage champagne. Every single detail, every refracted light and softly plucked bass string, felt violently opposed to the absolute fury currently boiling inside my veins. Through the sea of designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos, Julian navigated the room with the practiced grace of a seasoned predator. He was in his element, fully submerged in the delusion he had meticulously crafted. I watched him throw his head back in a robust, perfectly timed laugh at a joke told by one of Sloane's wealthy uncles. He held a highball glass of imported whiskey in one hand, gesturing expansively with the other as he played the role of the visionary tech entrepreneur. Every few minutes, he would make his way back to where I stood near the massive floral centerpieces. He would drape his heavy arm across my shoulders, pulling me awkwardly into the circles of his wealthy fake peers. "I just had to come check on my favorite girl," Julian announced to a group of 3 venture capitalists, squeezing my shoulder with a vice-like grip that bruised the skin beneath my silk dress. He offered them a smile dripping with manufactured sympathy. Cassidy gets a little overwhelmed in these high-energy environments, but I wanted her here tonight. Family is everything, right? You have to take care of your own, especially when they are struggling to find their footing. The investors nodded in solemn agreement, murmuring their approval of his profound generosity. I let him pull me close. I did not pull away. I just stared at him with flat, unblinking eyes, measuring the exact depth of his arrogance. The moment Julian stepped away to charm another group of old-money socialites, my mother materialized beside me. She did not look at my face. She kept her eyes fixed on the crowd, maintaining a rigid, terrifyingly bright smile, while her hand shot out and clamped onto my forearm. Her carefully manicured fingernails dug sharply into the fabric of my dress, pinching the flesh underneath with startling ferocity. "Keep that pleasant look on your face," she whispered harshly through her teeth, her voice barely audible over the clinking crystal and the soft jazz. "Do not just stand there glaring at him like a ghost. He is securing his entire future tonight. Do you see these people? Do you see the connections he is making? Just be quiet, drink your water, and do not do a single thing to ruin this for him. We are finally stepping into a better life." I looked down at her hand, clamped onto my arm like a parasite refusing to let go. I looked out at the glittering crowd, at the men in their $10,000 suits raising their glasses to toast my brother. They were drinking expensive wine that I had bled for. They were standing under a glass ceiling that I had rented with the hazard pay I earned by scrubbing biohazard waste off concrete floors. Every single fiber of this beautiful, opulent mirage was funded by the extreme physical danger I faced every single day. They were quite literally dancing on the agonizing labor of my life, entirely oblivious to the fact that the man they were celebrating was nothing more than a hollow thief. Then, the air in the room seemed to shift. The ambient noise dropped as a distinct, sharply dressed man walked briskly toward the head table. It was the lead legal counsel for Sloane's family estate. He carried a thick, dark leather portfolio with agonizing slowness. He unzipped the portfolio and extracted a massive stack of legal documents. He placed them precisely in the center of the main dining table, directly next to Julian's reserved seat. It was the $2 million venture capital contract. The stark white paper glared under the crystal lighting. A finalized deed of theft just waiting for my brother to press a pen to the signature line right after the celebratory speeches. My mother let go of my arm, clasping her hands together in front of her chest, as she stared at the contract with naked, hungry reverence. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the expensive orchid perfume in the air one last time. I reached into my small black evening clutch and pulled out my smartphone. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh blue glow. I bypassed my lock screen and opened the mobile browser, navigating directly to the private vendor management portal for the Glass Conservatory. I typed in the secure access code the events manager had emailed to me when I paid the invoice. The screen loaded, displaying the active booking under my corporate account. I scrolled down past the venue specifications, past the exorbitant catering fees, and past the floral arrangements, until I reached the bottom of the page. There, highlighted in bright, unforgiving red, was a single rectangular button. The text on the screen read, "Cancel event and initiate immediate clawback of full deposit." I rested the pad of my right thumb directly over the glaring red button. The jazz music continued to play. The champagne continued to pour, and I stood perfectly still in the shadows, a silent executioner waiting for the absolute perfect second to drop the blade. The sharp, piercing chime of a silver spoon tapping repeatedly against a crystal champagne flute sliced cleanly through the low hum of the room. The jazz quartet immediately ceased playing, the musicians lowering their instruments as the wealthy guests turned their attention toward the center of the grand space. Julian stood up at the head table. He adjusted the lapels of his custom tuxedo, projecting the absolute picture of a triumphant, self-made mogul. A wireless microphone rested easily in his right hand. He flashed a blinding, rehearsed smile at his beautiful fiancée, Sloane, and then swept his gaze across the sea of investors, socialites, and finally, my family tucked away in the corner. Then, his eyes found me, standing by the floral arrangements in the shadows. I watched as a smirk of pure, unadulterated condescension tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I want to thank everyone for joining us in this magnificent space tonight," Julian began, his voice smooth and echoing with artificial humility through the overhead speakers. "Tonight is about the future, about new partnerships, and most importantly, about family. We all have our burdens to carry, and we all make sacrifices to lift up those who cannot quite stand on their own." He raised his glass high, locking his eyes directly onto mine, making sure every person in the room followed his gaze to where I stood. "To family, and to my little sister, who has finally learned to be quiet and become useful for the little errands." A ripple of polite, knowing laughter washed over the crowd. Sloane's wealthy relatives chuckled into their expensive drinks, nodding at his supposedly gracious tolerance of his broken, janitorial sister. Over in the corner, I saw my mother beam with pride, her hands clasped together in silent applause, completely perfectly fine with her daughter being publicly humiliated as long as her son got his money. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I looked down at my phone screen, staring at the glowing red button on the venue management portal, my thumb pressed down hard against the glass. The screen instantly flashed a bright green confirmation banner. The deposit was canceled. The emergency financial clawback was officially authorized. I locked my phone, slipped it seamlessly into my clutch, and picked up my glass of heavy, blood-red wine. I stepped out of the shadows. The midnight black silk of my gown caught the crystal lighting as I moved with slow, deliberate, and predatory grace toward the front of the room. The best man, who was standing near the edge of the stage holding a secondary microphone for his upcoming speech, simply stared at me in confusion. Without breaking my stride, I reached out and pulled the microphone from his loose grip. I stopped dead center in the middle of the dance floor, raising my wine glass directly toward Julian. The room was still softly murmuring, but my voice cut through the air like a cracking whip. "To usefulness," I enunciated, every single syllable ringing out with icy, terrifying clarity through the high-fidelity sound system. "And to the $8,500 deposit for this exact venue, which I just clicked cancel on exactly 30 seconds ago." The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The ambient noise in the room vanished in a heartbeat. Someone dropped a heavy silver fork onto a porcelain plate, and the clatter echoed like a gunshot. The bartender stopped shaking a cocktail mid-motion. The entire venue plunged into a suffocating, dead silence. Julian's smug smile instantly vaporized. replaced by a chalky, bloodless panic. Before anyone could process the shock, I dropped the microphone on the floor and closed the remaining distance to the head table. I stepped right up to the massive centerpiece, looking down at Sloane's billionaire father. With a violent, heavy thud, I slammed the thick leather binder onto the table, directly on top of the pristine white tablecloth, mere inches from the unsigned $2 million venture capital contract. "There is no startup incubator," I stated, my voice projecting naturally, completely steady and stripped of any emotion. "There is no tech portfolio, and Julian is not the founder of Aegis Remediation Services. I built that company from the concrete up 6 years ago. I am the sole owner, the sole operator, and the only person who holds the municipal hazard contracts." I flipped the heavy binder open, revealing the crisp, legally certified documents inside. "What you are looking at right there are my original corporate tax returns, my state and corporation seals, and my certified profit and loss statements. If you look closely, you will see exactly where Julian took a digital scanner and crudely pasted his fake corporate logo over my name. He stole my financial history to convince you to hand him a $2 million check tonight." "Cassidy, shut your mouth!" Julian shrieked, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeal. He lunged forward, desperately trying to grab the binder, but Sloane's father slammed his massive hand down on the documents, pinning them to the table. Julian stumbled back, his eyes darting frantically around the room. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "Do not listen to her. She is deeply unwell. She is having a severe manic episode. I told you she was unstable. She is just a cleaner I hired out of pity." "The only thing I am cleaning up tonight is this pathetic scam," I fired back, my eyes locking onto the tycoon, who was rapidly flipping through the pages. The older man was a seasoned shark in the business world. It only took him a few seconds of looking at the authentic, notarized state seals to realize he had been thoroughly played. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a deep, furious crimson that mottled his neck. I turned my gaze back to my brother, who was now sweating profusely, his expensive custom suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. "You needed the $8,500 from my bank account because you are completely broke. Julian, you do not have a dime to your name. Every suit you wear, every luxury car you lease, and every single glass of champagne these people are drinking right now was paid for by the hazardous waste I scrub off industrial floors. You owe me thousands upon thousands of dollars. And as of this exact moment, the venue management is actively shutting down this open bar because the bill is no longer being paid." Sloane's father did not say a single word. He did not need to. He slowly picked up the $2 million investment contract, gripped it in both of his massive hands, and violently tore the thick stack of paper directly in half. The ripping sound was deafening in the silent room. He dropped the shredded pieces onto the floor. Sloane let out a sound that was half sob, half scream of pure revulsion. She stared at Julian as if he were a rotting corpse. Without a second of hesitation, she yanked the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger and hurled it directly at his chest. The heavy stone bounced off his lapel and clattered sharply onto the marble floor, rolling away into the shadows. "Sloane, please, I can explain everything. It is a misunderstanding," Julian stammered, dropping to his knees, his hands scrambling desperately across the floor trying to find the ring. He was weeping now, a pathetic, snot-nosed display of total ruin. "Sir, please, the projections are real. I swear on my life." No one moved to help him. The elite investors, the socialites, the uncles and aunts who had just been laughing with him, all stepped back in uniform disgust. Over in the corner, my mother had collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, her illusions of high society grandeur entirely incinerated. I looked down at the wreckage I had just created. There was no sadness. There was only a profound, incredibly deep sense of liberation. I picked up my glass of red wine, took one final deliberate sip, and set it down next to the shredded pieces of the contract. Without another word, I turned my back on the head table. I walked slowly and purposefully toward the elevator. The glittering crowd of Chicago's wealthiest elites silently parted ways for me, pulling their silk dresses and tuxedo jackets back to ensure they did not block my path. I walked out into the cool night air, leaving a stripped and unmasked fraud kneeling in the ashes of his own catastrophic lies. The fallout was incredibly swift and utterly merciless. Just 3 days after the engagement party shattered into a million pieces, the financial shockwave hit. Because I had officially revoked my corporate backing and initiated the fraud clawback on the deposit. The Glass Conservatory immediately redirected the remaining balance of the canceled event straight to the man who signed the catering and lighting contracts. Julian was hit with a bill for nearly $50,000 in sudden cancellation penalties and broken contracts. He did not have 50 cents to his name, let alone $50,000. The massive debt pushed him straight over the edge into legitimate, inescapable bankruptcy. He was not the only one who faced the consequences. Later that same week, my mother bypassed the security desk at my warehouse and stormed directly into the main loading bay of Aegis Remediation Services. She was a complete wreck, her usually immaculate hair disheveled, tears streaming down her face, screaming over the loud hum of the industrial extractors. "You destroyed him!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me while my hazardous materials team watched in stunned silence. "You took a knife to your own flesh and blood. Julian was finally going to be somebody, and you ruined his entire future out of pure, selfish spite." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply walked over to my foreman's desk, picked up a thick manila envelope, and handed it to her. Inside was a legally binding cease and desist letter, alongside a formally filed no-contact order drafted by my corporate attorney. I did not ruin his future, I told her, my voice perfectly calm and completely detached. I simply stopped paying for his delusions. You have exactly 2 minutes to leave my private property before I have my security team escort you out and press criminal trespassing charges. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, finally realizing that the endless well of my tolerance had run completely dry. She turned and walked away, and that was the absolute last time I ever spoke to my mother. Looking back, I want you to understand that pressing that cancellation button on my phone was not an act of impulsive, blind rage. It was a precise, necessary surgical strike. For years, I had allowed them to convince me that my worth was tied to my compliance. I let them treat me like a toxic tumor, something to be hidden away in the shadows while they fed off my lifeblood. But I finally took the scalpel and cut the real parasite out of my life. Without my financial shield, Julian's carefully constructed digital mirage instantly collapsed. The venture capital fallout triggered a domino effect. His old creditors, the ones I used to pay off in secret, caught wind of his public humiliation and descended on him like vultures. With his reputation entirely incinerated within the Chicago business community, he could not even secure a job in a corporate mailroom. The last I heard, the great visionary startup investor is now working a part-time shift scanning barcodes at a suburban convenience store, forced to wear a polyester uniform and live every single day in the crushing, suffocating shame of his own making. As for me, I learned exactly what it means to be useful. My usefulness is not a welcome mat for lazy, entitled people to wipe their muddy shoes on. My usefulness is my power. It is the brilliant, undeniable force that built an empire from bleach and concrete. It gives me the absolute authority to dictate who is allowed to sit at my table and who deserves to benefit from the immense value I create with my own 2 hands. If you take anything away from my story, let it be this one unbreakable rule. Do not ever confuse genuine family love with financial and emotional exploitation. Blood does not give anyone a free pass to drain your soul, and sometimes, when you finally realize you are trapped in a rigged game, the only way to truly win is to stand up and flip the entire board. Thank you all so incredibly much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let me know your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's journey empowering and want to help keep this channel alive, Please consider supporting us with a donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the secure donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Every single dollar goes directly to paying the dedicated staff here, helping them feed their families and keeping the lights on so they can continue creating and sharing these amazing stories with all of you. Stay strong, know your absolute worth, and never let anyone dim your light.